Tonight, we are having our third Parent Academy, and tonight's topic is navigating peer relationships and conflicts. We had two Parent Academies earlier than tonight. One was about student discipline, and another one was about the relationship of our SROs and our parent and police within our departments. You can find that information on our website. Tonight, as I mentioned, is talking about peer relationships and conflicts, something that I think as parents, as staff, we are all dealing with. And I will turn the meeting over to Ms. Dawn Faulkner, who is our social emotional learning and wellness coordinator, who has worked very diligently with others to have this event take place tonight. So Dawn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Talley. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for an open discussion on how we can support our children as they navigate peer relationships and conflicts. As we continue to return to a sense of normalcy after the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent quarantine, parents and school staff have shared concerns about how we can help students build and maintain healthy friendships, as well as what children should do when they do experience conflicts with peers. At the end of the 2021-2022 school year, a survey was sent to parents in the school community about topics of interest. We received an overwhelming response to wanting to learn more about navigating peer relationships. This evening, we will share practical strategies as well as, if time allows, for parents to share their own experience and expertise in small groups. If you have a question or want to share an idea, please send it in the chat. If we have time at the end, we can address these questions as a group. At this time, I would like to introduce tonight's presenters. To have a well-rounded discussion of the topic, we've invited a member from each of our three mental health branches: school counselor Allison Genslinger from Scullin Middle School, school psychologist Lisa Liacci from Hill Middle School, and Claudia Morales, school social worker from Granger Middle School. At this time, I will go ahead and pass it over to Claudia to start our presentation.
Hello, good evening. So today the topics that we will be discussing is problems versus conflict versus bullying, school considerations, strategies for parents, then we'll have a panel discussion, breakout session. So first, I'd like to define what is a problem. So a problem is a matter or situation that is considered to be harmful or unpleasant. A conflict can be described as a problem if the situation or disagreement escalates. Now, what is a conflict? A conflict is a disagreement or argument in which both sides express their views. Conflict is a natural part of human relationships. Conflict is not, however, bullying. Conflict happens between two people who have two different views about what's going on. Sometimes this escalates into disagreements that can lead to someone becoming emotional. So I wanted to give a little example of each one. So relating it to students, a problem can be seen as a student feeling like their group, let's say a group work that they're working on, one student may be feeling they're doing all the work and another student is not doing any of the work. Therefore, part of that project is not being finished, and then that causing the project to have a lower grade or not be ready to present. Where conflict might be where one student has a friend that invites them to a party, but does not invite another friend. And now that student that was invited to the birthday party might feel conflicted to choose to which friend do they side with, the one that wasn't invited, the one that was not invited, and not knowing where to go from there. So it's not necessarily a situation that would cause maybe a fight, but it is a situation where that student would feel conflicted. Now, we're going to discuss what is bullying. So some people think that bullying and conflict are the same thing, but they aren't. Conflict can be part of an everyday experience. Usually conflicts don't make someone feel unsafe or threatened. Bullying, on the other hand, is meant to hurt or humiliate a targeted person, and the target is not able to make the bullying stop. It is repeated and over a period of time. Now, sometimes it can be easy to minimize a bullying situation because a person does not want to deal with the reality of what is happening. A person can get into a pattern of qualifying bullying as conflict to avoid facing the actual problem, when it really is something that the person does not deserve and something that requires outside intervention. So in the middle school setting, we've seen a lot of students who feel like, I can handle this. I don't need other support. I don't need to let anyone else know about this. But we always encourage that even if you suspect that it's bullying, to reach out, because maybe if you don't consider it bullying, another student might. And like we said, no one deserves to have to experience that. Now, from a school perspective, what do we consider bullying? So some questions that we might ask is there history between the students involved? Have there been past conflicts? Is there a power imbalance? Now, a power imbalance is not limited to physical strength. If the targeted student feels that there's a power imbalance, there probably is. Has this happened before? Is the student worried it will happen again? Each bullying or alleged bullying situation will be handled differently. Therefore, it's important for us to ask these questions to find the best approach. Schools are committed to making students feel safe and seek support from adults if bullying is suspected. And I'll pass it along to Allison. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Genslinger. I'm the school counselor at Scullin, and I'm happy to be with you guys tonight. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some specific strategies for us as parents. Full disclosure, I have raised 5 teenage boys. And I've been in the middle school for a very long time, about 30 years. So I feel like those two things can really help us, really get together on some good strategies that will help out. So on the screen here are just some, kind of food for thought about, with our teenagers and our preteens. So I think it's important as parents to kind of let our kids follow their instincts and go with the friendships that they want to pursue. They're not always the ones that maybe we would choose for them. We may not always see what attracts them to certain friends, but that's sort of how they're going to learn, is through trial and error. And certainly in the middle school, that is particularly true. As the elementary schools start to blend with one another, then kids are trying out some new friendships and trying to kind of figure out what works best for them. And learning how to maintain those healthy friendships or attract healthy friendships is a really important practice for the rest of our lives. So that's really important for our kiddos to have a chance to practice that as well. I feel like as a parent, it's important that when your kids are having some of that friendship drama, so where it's like the problem or the conflict, like Claudia just spoke to, I think it's best for us as parents to try to let our kids navigate that as best as they can. So offering support, being a good listener, trying not to take sides is really important, because I think maybe if you've already experienced this, if your son or daughter is in a conflict with a friend or having a problem with a friend, if we take a side, you never know. 2 days later, they might be best friends again. So kind of holding back on some of those negative comments about that, maybe that other friend, or the way you didn't like the way something happened, can be problematic moving down the road as they continue to be friends. Something that I tell my own children at home and the children that I work with at Scullin is, this is your practice time, and this is what you're practicing to be an adult. And so all of these conflicts, all of these opportunities that you have during the day to work with kids or to learn how to ask questions, all of those things are practice for adulthood. And so we really want our kids to have that opportunity to sort of swing and miss or strike out, experience some of those failures, which is so hard to do as a parent, to watch our kids be sad or suffer or have their feelings hurt. But that is also practice, learning how to deal with those negative emotions. How do I handle it when I feel bad about something? What's kind of my limits in that friendship? Like, is it okay that my feelings are hurt once or twice, but maybe 3 or 4 times? That's an opportunity for your child to then sort of decide, like, is this really the friendship for me? So it's really important to give them that opportunity to continue to practice. I think it's also important just to remember that our kiddos are wired for this peer approval and social connections. That is their number one priority in the teen years. That is developmentally appropriate. That's what's supposed to be happening. You're probably already experiencing this if you have a teen or a middle schooler, that you're already noticing that their social interactions, their peers are far more important, or feel like they're far more important than family. Like what I think as a mom is far less important than the person that they sit next to at lunch. So, and that's appropriate. That's what's supposed to be happening. I think it's just good to keep that in mind, because then when you're asking questions or when you're offering your advice, although it may be very sage and wise, they're not really always ready to hear that. Especially if it's a negative comment about a friend or a situation, they can become very defensive about that, because that's the most important thing to them. So next slides, we're going to talk a little bit more about like how do we talk to our kids about our concerns, and then when is it time to go beyond talking. So I have a couple conversation starters. For me, just in my experience, I like to talk to my kids in a relaxed environment. I actually think that when you're in the car driving somewhere, which most of us are doing all the time, I find that to be the best time. You're focused on driving. There is no real direct eye contact. I think it can feel less intimidating to our kiddos. So sometimes if I'm cooking, folding laundry, whatever, it might be a time to just sort of bring it up kind of on the side. So like, tell me about Susie, or tell me about your friends at lunch. Like, what's that like for you? What does that seem like? How does that work? How do you decide where to sit? Like, those types of questions can just start opening up the conversation about friends. It's unintimidating. It's not necessarily a direct, like, what's happening with that girl? I'm not so sure I like what I'm hearing from her, because that's immediately those defenses are going to go up. If you have noticed some conflict, or have heard that on the phone, or noticed your child to be upset about things, I think it's perfectly okay, right, to address that with them, using those I statements, like, I noticed you seem upset when, whenever that is, whatever it might be, as when they're reading text messages, if they've come back from a sleepover, those types of things. They may not, be ready to talk about it, but just saying, like, I noticed a difference, or I noticed you seemed upset. It at least puts it out there that you're noticing something. And then when they're ready to talk about it, hopefully they'll circle back with you if they weren't ready in that very moment. The next one is what makes up a good or bad friend. So obviously that would be maybe at one of those times when you're maybe watching something on television. That's another bullet point here. If you're seeing some friendships demonstrated in a movie or a television, asking what makes a good friend. Why do you think, let me think if I can think of an example. I'm always going to, like, what am I watching currently? So, like, what's happening with, that person, that particular Sheldon, we'll say, like, what makes him a good friend to Leonard or whatever. And then you can talk about that with your kiddos. Like, what do you think about that? Or maybe you'll just demonstrate something on television where they're not being very good friends. And we can talk about how in our family, we really value honesty, or we really value following the rules or whatever. And if that's something you're seeing demonstrated on television or in a movie or something, that's a great opportunity to sort of talk about that too. Although the next one is about, your own friendships from your school years. I don't know that sometimes kids are not always all that interested in that, but I think it's important to say, like, I can remember when, a group of girls in third grade didn't want to sit with me at lunch. And that really hurt my feelings. And even though now I'm an adult, I still remember that. And I wish I had, whatever, fill in the blank. I wish I had stood up for myself, or I wish I had, sat with someone else and made new friends, or, whatever it might have, whatever might be for your particular story. I think offering those up for your kids is important, to know that this is a normal part of growing up. This is something we've all experienced. And even though you're an adult now, and you still had those experiences as a kid. And the next bullet point there is, just like when we're talking with our kids, we're the commentator. We're not the referee. So it sounds like you and your friends are having an argument. It looks like maybe you're upset about that. So you're really sort of observing what's happening, as opposed to saying, she was really unfair when she didn't invite you to the party. I don't really want you to be friends with her because she always hurts your feelings. Although you may feel that way, and you may really want your child to move forward with that friendship, or move away from that friendship. Like I said before, if you go out on a limb with how you feel about a particular friendship, it could backfire if your child's not ready to move forward to a different friendship. They might stay friends, and then you're kind of stuck with those negative comments. And then next is, we're going to move on to Lisa Liacci, and she should be coming in right now.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Lisa Liacci. I'm the school psychologist at Hill Middle School. So next part, we're going to talk about how do we teach our kids to resolve conflicts? How do we teach them to navigate some of these troubled waters? So, when we work with our students on how to resolve this conflict, we really start with getting our kids to really start with identifying the problem. What is going on here? What do I want out of this situation? What does this other person want? Really defining what is the problem, with the idea that we want to separate those emotions a little bit, because we can have those conflicts. We can feel really upset and feel like things are really, really unfair. But when we get bogged down in all of those negative feelings, sometimes it's hard for our kids to really understand what is the true conflict. So that's where we want to start, really defining that problem. And then from there, getting our kids to identify solutions. And it can be a variety of them, but thinking about, okay, what are some ideas that will meet my needs? What are some ideas that will meet this other person's needs? And then of all of these ideas, what's maybe the most respectful option? What is the safest solution? What's going to keep myself from getting in trouble? What's going to keep that other person from getting in trouble? And really trying to get into that habit of, okay, there can be a variety of options here, and there's always going to be some solution that meets everyone's needs. Sometimes we have to help our kids brainstorm a little bit. And then another big part is really working with our kids on identifying what is within their control and what is outside their control. And that's a really hard concept, I think, for everyone, even adults sometimes, to really get into that habit of identifying, okay, what can I do about a situation, and really what is outside the realm of my control. We know that we cannot control other people's feelings. We can't control what other people do. And sometimes in a conflict, especially with our kids, our kids want that other person to bend, say, well, I want him to stop doing this. I want him to say sorry. I want him to feel bad. I want her to, be friends with me again. We cannot control those things, but we can control how we respond to a situation. We can control the language that we use. We can control whether we want to engage or disengage. So getting into that habit of really identifying what is under your umbrella of control, and then what is all that static outside that we cannot spend our energy on because we'll just spin our wheels. So another big part is we want to teach our kids how to advocate for themselves, how to stand up for themselves, and really share what they need out of a situation. So for there, we really start with getting our kids to identify their feelings, whether it's a conflict, a problem, or a bullying situation. How do you feel right now? Do you feel angry? Do you feel hurt? Do you feel embarrassed? What are those feelings? When we identify those feelings, it gives us a way to start trying to solve those problems. It opens up options for solutions. And we want our kids to really practice communicating their needs, not just desires, especially with some of those, conflicts within peer friend groups of like, well, I feel like this was really unfair. I really wanted to be invited to this party, and, I feel like excluded. I want to be a part of that. I want everyone to invite me. Well, that might be a desire, but it might not be a need. So we have to think about, well, what do you need? Do you feel disrespected? Because maybe that's going to lead us to a different solution of opening up our friend group to other people. Or do we need to then share how we're feeling? Because maybe your friend didn't realize that those words were hurtful. So really identifying what are the needs here? What do you need out of this situation versus what would just be nice to have out of a friend group? And we all know that for anything, whether it's academic, social, emotional, friendship, practice makes perfect. We want our kids to practice identifying adults that they can talk to. So sit down with your kids, say, hey, who do you talk to at school? Like, who do you feel safe talking to? Who are your teachers? Do you feel comfortable with them? Or do you have a counselor or a social worker or a psychologist available that you can meet? And if they don't, have your child practice. Say, why don't you stop by the counseling office? Just introduce yourself. It doesn't have to be a conversation. It can just be a, hey, what's up? Here I am. I just wanted to know where my people were. We want our kids to come into school knowing who their safe adults are, so that if something does happen, they know who to reach out to. We also want to have our kids identify language that they can use and then practice saying it. A lot of what I work with our students is practicing those I statements. So really getting into that habit of saying, hey, I felt hurt when you said that, or I feel like I've been doing a lot of this group project, and I would really like some extra help with this. Getting into that habit of focusing on what do I need versus pushing that blame onto others. I think we know with, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school, or even adults, it's really easy to fall into that trap of like, well, you're doing this and you're not being nice, you're being mean, I'm doing everything, you're doing nothing. And that is only going to escalate our conflicts and our peer conflict and situations. So we really want our kids to practice that habit of, I feel this way, let's self to feel better about this. I think then in that sense, it's really role play. As silly as it sounds, practice with your child. How do you advocate for yourself? How do you share if you feel like things are unfair in your group? Even if you are taking on the role of a peer, again, it might feel really silly, but have your kid practice that language. Have them share how they are feeling in that situation, and then you can respond. So you can have that back and forth to really test the waters of how that conflict resolution might go. I know, one example that I like to practice a lot with our kids are some of those group projects where things might feel really unfair. So I will take on that role of a peer, and I have that student practice saying to me like, hey, I feel like I've been doing the bulk of the work. And then I respond and say, no, you haven't. So then that student has to get into that habit of saying, okay, here's how I feel. Here's how I think we can solve this situation. Here are some ideas. So it gets them in that habit of really identifying their needs, voicing their concerns, voicing some solutions, so that when they're really in that situation, they're going to feel more comfortable sharing what they need. A big issue that I know everyone has probably dealt with is online conflict or bullying, which, with all the apps now, it's just a part of our culture. So it is important to work with your child on how do you navigate this when this comes up. We always tell our kids, talk to a trusted adult. And that's both for online bullying or in-person bullying or conflict. If something is happening, talk to an adult, whether it is a parent or a school staff member, but we want our kids to share before things get bigger, before people feel unsafe. We want them to share that information. If it's an isolated event, so maybe not at that level of bullying, but maybe a friend has a mean comment or they post an embarrassing picture. For those isolated events, practice ignoring or laughing it off. As hard as that is, sometimes we want to take away that power from that response, because we know that if people are posting things that are negative, sometimes they're trying to get a reaction. So when we don't feed that reaction, oftentimes that person will move on because they are not getting what they want out of it. But we also want our kids to set boundaries. So this, I think, particularly in friend groups where sometimes there's that, sometimes positive, sometimes negative interactions, sometimes people are posting mean pics or making mean comments. It's fine to set boundaries. We want our kids to advocate for themselves and say, hey, I don't like it when you post these things. I want you to stop. Or, I don't think that's a nice thing to say. That was really mean. Please don't do that again. Really be clear with setting those boundaries. We also want our kids to keep records. So if this is something that is continuing, if you are talking with your child and they are sharing that like, hey, this person's always saying things or all these people are posting comments about me, keep those records. If this is becoming a continual problem, it is helpful to have that evidence so that, eventually if you do need to pursue that, you have all of that information in line. And then you can also report it to content providers or online platforms. So not just following it up with the school, but if you're on Snapchat and your child's getting all of these negative comments, you can report accounts to the Snapchat platform and report those bullying or report harassment there or any other online account. I would also encourage our students to block accounts or phone numbers. So if they're getting repeated messages, really learn how to use that technology. How do you block an account? How do you set your information on private so that other people can't access it? How do you block a phone number with your cell phone provider? Learn all of those pieces so that we can better protect our children. I also encourage our kids not to pass along hurtful or embarrassing messages or photos of others. So if they are not the targets of bullying, but they see an embarrassing picture of someone else go by, don't add to that problem. Shut it down there, delete the photo. Don't add it. Don't pass it on. We want to nip some of these things in the bud. And then finally, we encourage our kids to not respond or retaliate. As difficult as this is, we don't want to feed into that flame. We don't want our students to then become part of the back and forth, especially if it's a bullying situation. That can sometimes muddy those waters and figuring out, well, where did this conflict start? If we try to cut it off and say, okay, let's disengage, we're going to save all of this information, we'll follow up with the appropriate people, but don't respond, don't retaliate, so that you don't then become part of that problem, and then you don't have to suffer any consequences from that end of it.
All right, at this time, we're going to go ahead and move into our panel discussion. So thank you, Allison and Claudia and Lisa, for giving us so much great information as well as practical strategies. So when people registered for this parent university, there was a portion where they were allowed to share questions or concerns that they were having. And we went through and kind of pulled out some common trends. And there are 4 questions, and I'm going to share them with all of you. And then Allison, Claudia, and Lisa will all share their thoughts or how they would respond to each of those questions. As you're sitting here watching this, if you have an idea or a thought and you wanted to share how you would respond to it, you are more than welcome to share that in the chat with the other families. So one of the first questions we were asked, and I feel like this was a reoccurring question, was how do I support my middle school child when their friend group does not include him or her in an activity? For example, a party or hang out at somebody's house or going somewhere after school, but it's outside of the school day. And then how do I help my child when he or she then sees those pictures posted on social media or maybe shared in texts? So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lisa and Claudia and Allison, whoever wants to jump in first. So how do we support our kids when they feel like they're being excluded from an activity, but it's really outside the school day?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a hard one. I know that comes up a lot. And, middle school is really high time for a lot of friend groups to change and shift. So we do see this a lot. I do think that part of that is identifying, again, what's within control and what's outside control. And, as much as we want our kids to be included and we want their friend group to include them, there might be some times where we have to recognize and say, okay, like we can't force a friend group to invite them, and we can't force, someone to hang out with them. We can't say, okay, let's make this person your best friend. But we can work with our kids in identifying okay, what do you need out of this? What are you feeling? Do you feel disrespected? Do you feel lonely? And that can help then guide what those next steps are. So if your child is really saying I feel left out, I feel like my friends are kind of leaving me, well, then maybe it's an opportunity to then expand that friend group and identify, what are some other activities that you enjoy? Are there other kids in your class or in other groups that you do connect well with? Because if you are feeling like you are left out of that group, knowing we can't force that group to invite you to activities, we can encourage some other connections with other people who might respect you a little bit more, who are wanting to include you, are seeking you out. And how do we put the energy toward those things that we can control versus those things we can't control?
I was going to add that, if it's one of those things ahead of time that the party's happening and you're not invited, I think it's great to try to find something else to do. So it doesn't mean that it's like a revenge party that you need to have because your child's not going, but certainly finding another activity for the evening or the afternoon or however that works. A good distraction I think is helpful, and then also just kind of avoiding social media. So if the party's coming and I'm not invited, then I'm just going to try to avoid social media because I know ahead of time that that's going to upset me. And then obviously sometimes we don't know, right? Like that pops up on social media. And now all of a sudden I find out that 3 of my friends and I'm the only one left out. And so I think we talked a little bit earlier about kind of, being there to support and listen, but knowing that our kids do sometimes have to experience those hurt feelings, like understanding how to cope with that sadness is really an important quality. And it's really important for our kids to start building up some of that stamina of, when we're disappointed, because it's going to happen. And so it's important to kind of practice that and have some skills ready for coping when those negative emotions are happening.
I can add that a lot of the times when I have students that come in and talk about how they feel excluded all the time, one thing that I like to ask them is, have you tried reaching out? because I think sometimes students struggle with realizing that maybe others aren't aware that these students want to be included because they don't ever initiate things. So I encourage them, like, well, why don't you propose something? You know, if it goes through, great. And if it doesn't, now you know. And also I tell them, like, the way that you made friends in elementary school is very different from the way you're going to make friends in middle school. So in elementary school, sometimes you can go up to a student in your classroom and say, do you want to be friends? And they might say yes, and you guys are automatically friends. Well, that doesn't always translate in middle school, where you might have very different interests. So it's hard to build those relationships. Not impossible, because there's so many other kids. We just have to keep that in mind, that sometimes we need to be the ones to initiate, and sometimes we have to find, seek out different students that maybe we wouldn't have considered in the past that could be a friend of ours.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, a second question that was asked is, how do I help my child create a diverse friend group so that he or she does not get stuck in the best friend mentality? Meaning that my child doesn't feel like they always have to stay with one friend, rather they can have a group of friends. And this was kind of asked across all levels, not necessarily specific to elementary, middle school, or high school.
I think a good way to encourage that is to really start with, what are your child's interests? What do they want to pursue outside of just academic activities, whether it's sports, arts, music, any of those other activities, because that's going to be a good way to find other peers that they connect with, that they share similar interests with. We're always working on our kids on developing their individuality, and we don't want them to sacrifice who they are in order to connect with someone or in order to fit with that one best friend. So encouraging them, like, hey, let's find a new activity that you are interested in, because naturally then you're going to be in an environment with other peers who have those similar interests, and that itself might foster some more connections outside of just that one best friend.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking with Lisa, like I see that often in middle school, like the kids will sort of have like maybe their band friends or their orchestra friends, and then their friends that are on the same team, maybe some neighborhood friends. And I think that's great. I think it can be difficult sometimes for the kids to navigate, like, well, those aren't really the people I socialize with, or that's not who I'm necessarily going to hang out with. Like, I have a couple friends in orchestra, but I don't always invite them over. And so I think that can be helpful from a parent perspective to try to encourage that a little bit. I do think that usually kids do have what they might say are friends, right? Like, they're not like my real friends, but they're my friends in band, or they're my friends from karate, or, I'm sure you guys all have some examples of your own for that, that type of thing. And so I think that just kind of that push a little bit, like, well, why don't you invite a karate friend over? Maybe we'll go out for ice cream after, or whatever, to try to encourage that a little bit. Cause I think that can be really difficult for kids to know, like, you can kind of cross over with those friendship groups, that you don't just have to have one group that you like do the socializing part with, that's maybe outside of the activity, like the band or the karate.
All right, so the next question is, my child is often quiet at school and has difficulty making friends. And we know we have lots of introverted kids. As a result, he or she feels anxiety about going to school. As a parent, how can I help? And what resources do the schools offer to assist with helping students build friendships?
I'll start with the resources part, because, I do think this comes up a lot. I would be open with your teachers and with support staff, like counselors or social workers, psychologists, because, every school is a little bit different just in terms of how things might be delivered, but there are always opportunities for staff to help facilitate some of those things. So in class, it could be, hey, like, my child is really struggling here. Can you help them connect with some peers? Your teacher's going to have a good idea of, like, who are some, great kids in that class who are open and friendly and welcoming. And maybe it's, doing some selective pairing with grouping or with seating. I know in my school, our counselors sometimes offer, just groups for kids to get to know other students, and they're maybe like short-term groups, but it's just an opportunity to expand friend groups, make connections in kind of like a like a low stress setting, whether it's lunch or out of an encore period. So there are definitely opportunities. Again, it might differ from school to school, but I think starting with that communication piece is going to be the most important. Let your school staff know what your concerns are, because they might have some really great ideas on how to facilitate some of those connections.
Yeah, this is tough because, obviously you're the expert on your kids as a parent, and it is hard to ferret out sometimes, like how much of that is like personal preference. Like, I am a quieter kid. I don't really need 6 friends. I really kind of just want 1 or 2. And then how do you navigate that if you're at school and maybe those kids don't, I have a good best friend or a couple of kids I like to be with, but I don't have classes with them, or they don't go to my school. And so that can be really difficult when some kids just don't have that need for a lot of social interaction. But yeah, when they're at school, they're seeing other kids who are super connected or somewhat connected, and they're feeling left out of that. So I think it's okay to sort of quantify or qualify that for our kiddos at school. Like, when you're at school, they don't have to be your I'm going to come over to your house friends. They can be, I'm going to work in a group with you friends. They can be, I just want to sit, we sit together at lunch. We don't do a lot of things outside of school, but we can still have sort of like a different level of friendships. And I think kind of qualifying that for kids, and maybe explaining like sort of how that works in your own life. I have work friends, and I have friends that we are friends because our kids are friends, right? And then I have my good friends. And I think that's okay to just sort of describe that to your kids and see if that's a way to help them feel a little bit better about the connections they are making at school. Definitely piggyback with Lisa. Give us a call your school counselor, call your classroom teacher. We are ready. We want to help out with that. We don't know when it's just a kiddo who's just a little quieter, or if it's someone who's really experiencing some loneliness. So we want to know so that we can help.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Sometimes I'm looking for students for my social group. So if I have students that we teachers have mentioned before, or parents have given me a call about, it's great to know that maybe they would fit into a social group. And it's great to see when you group 2 students that didn't know each other, and then you see them walking the hallways together, talking, and realizing that social group was a little bridge for them to connect. So never hesitate. And then obviously, it's not as common in elementary school, but in middle school and high school, those clubs, when they start realizing like there are other students that do have their interests. Because I think many students think like other people might think that's for babies, or people think that's weird. But then there's a club for that, and then they identify and they feel seen and heard at school.
All right. Our last question, and probably our toughest question, and the one we got most often, which is, how can I support my child with peer relationships without taking over, right? Like, as parents, I can even speak from my own personal experience. When we feel like our child is in conflict, or we feel like our child's excluded, we do want to jump in and we do want to fix it, make things better for our kids. So how do I know if I need to take a step back? See, I said it was a tough one.
Yeah, that is tough. And, there's a little bit of trial and error in there, I think, because it's hard, I think, as a parent to want, you want to fix it. We want our kids, and even as staff members, like, we want to fix problems. We want our kids to thrive and do well. And it is hard to watch kids struggle through that. So I think first starting with that, taking that deep breath and being like, okay, this is how my child learns. This is how they learn what a healthy relationship is like. This is how they learn to advocate, by going through these things. We obviously want to make sure that our kids are safe. So I think, asking some good questions, just, what is going on? Tell me more about this. Because we do want to suss out, is this a conflict versus is this bullying, where, there could be some safety pieces in mind that we do absolutely want to take care of. If we're thinking that this is just like kind of a conflict, it's an ongoing thing, and there's some friend groups changing, and my child is just really struggling with it. I think, again, going back to some of those like conversation starters, going with that sports commentator versus referee kind of mentality of, okay, I can comment on it. Like, this is what it sounds like. I'm hearing you say this. It sounds like, you're struggling with this. It sounds like this is what that conflict might be. I wonder if there are some ways we can solve this, instead of jumping in being like, okay, here's 5 top ideas of how we can fix this, but really trying to get your child to identify what are some possible solutions, and then recognizing that those solutions might not always work, but we're going to try them, we're going to reflect on them, and we're going to see which ones got us closer to our goal, which ones got us further away. And I think, again, recognizing as a parent, as hard as it is, that journey might be a challenge, but that is how our kids learn. That is how they develop these skills. It is not by us paving the road and making it easy. It is by us helping guide through those challenging times.
I think being really authentic with our kids is important too. So it's okay to say, I don't really know how to help you navigate this. This is really hard for me to watch. I can see this is really hurting your feelings, and it is really hard for me not to take sides. But I'm here to support you. I'm here to listen. Let me know when you're ready for me to step in and help you fix this, if you need help doing that. And back to, like, who's another trusted adult that you could talk to? Because we do that a lot at school. That's a big part of my day, is helping kids navigate that conflict with one another, letting them practice, how do you talk to each other? I can kind of be like a little bit of a coach and a little bit of a referee sometimes at school, where the kids need a little bit of just that opportunity to speak to one another when there's an adult there to kind of help them navigate through that, when it's difficult, when they're emotional, whatever. So please let us know, again, if that's something that we can help out with. And even if you just want to know, I don't know if I should take a step back on this. I can't tell if I should be doing more with this. Like, that's part of our jobs too, is to help parents, try to, with those specific situations. We're happy to talk those through with y'all too.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And I would just say a lot of my job too is like problem solving. So not necessarily, like we've said earlier, telling them what to do or what I would do. It's just hearing them out, let them know, let them tell us what are some possibilities and what are some outcomes. So we don't have that learned helplessness that sometimes we see, and sometimes the struggle to get students to try in the future. I would also say size of the problem. Sometimes I think we have to realize how big that problem is impacting our student. Is it something that's really interfering, or is it just something that's just bugging them? And actually, I forgot. I'm sorry. If it comes back to me, I'll let you guys know.
Great. Thank you so much. Right. And I saw somebody also put another session like this would be helpful. We can certainly take that feedback and look at doing a second parent university, maybe not on the exact same information, but maybe we want to dig a little deeper into like the social media piece, if we want to look more level specific between elementary, middle, and high school. Any feedback you have for us is always appreciated, and then we can use that to move forward. At this time, if anyone has any questions for Allison or for Lisa or for Claudia or for the greater good, we welcome those questions. All right, Dr. Taylor, I'm not seeing any questions, but if anybody pops anything in, we can always circle back at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to you to wrap up.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you to all of our presenters tonight. I think to our parents who are participating in the call, you can see that we have great resources in the school, and they do want to work with you when you have problems or questions. Their skill set is extraordinary, and they are there to serve our children and to work with you as you are trying to navigate the world of your child growing up. I think we can all try to go back to our days when we were teenagers, and how difficult it may have been for us. Life is very different now that we are adults and our kids are becoming teenagers. And so it's a time to navigate. It's a very bumpy and a roundabout way to growing up, but it happens, and it will eventually happen to all of our children. I'm hopeful that you have learned something tonight. Dawn, thank you so much for organizing this. Jeannie Dinah, also thank you for your organization. Lisa Berry as well for your involvement as well. The last thing I will say is this. I know there was a conversation about online bullying, and I will remind all parents, please, please look at your child's phone. You're the one who bought it. You're the one who pays the bill. And so it is important that you are examining the phone. I've had some parents who have said they never look at their child's cell phone. And that is not the way it should be, because the online activity, whether it is text messaging or social media, that's something you should be monitoring with your child. And your child should know that that's what should happen. And so I hope you will do that and examine it. Remember, we're here to answer your questions and here to work with you. Thank you so much. And to all of you, have a wonderful night and a good rest of your week.